So, hello everyone, and welcome to the S Word, Stanislavski and Disability. Thank you all very much for joining us for the third in our ongoing series of webinars, which are presented in collaboration with the Stanislavsky Research Centre. My name is Paul Fryer, and I am the co-director of the Centre, and I am the co-founder of the S Word. Those of you who have already taken part in our events will know that the S Word is a collaborative research project, and we have partners all over the world. And the project was set up to explore the work and the legacy of Konstantin Stanislavski in the context of contemporary theatre, performance, and related media. Now, during the current COVID crisis, we have not been able to present our usual symposia. Unlike many other projects, we've taken our work online. But we are planning major live events for 2022, and we'll be publishing further information about these in the next few months. So please keep an eye on the Stanislavsky Research Centre website for more news of those events. I want particularly to take the opportunity of thanking our friend and colleague Bella Merlin, who is the co-founder of the S Word, for originating today's webinar, and of course to thank all of the panel members who are joining us for this event. I also want to thank Stefan Aquilina, the co-director of the Stanislavsky Research Centre, who will be the moderator of this webinar, and for our colleagues at the University of Malta for hosting the event. Before we begin, we just want to take a few minutes to share with you one of the Research Centre's most important developments: the creation of our new website, Stanislavsky Here, Today, Now, which officially launches today. So I'd first of all then like to hand you over to Jonathan Pitchers, the Deputy Director of the Centre, who's going to introduce the new site.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to see those names coming down the participants list and all the panelists as well. In a sense, I feel a bit of a pretender to be representing the website because I've been a little bit in the background in terms of its development. I wanted to first name Joel Dunham, who's been working on the mechanics of this website, and indeed to Stefan and Paul for configuring it and thinking through it conceptually. Now, I know Stefan has a few screen grabs, and I think if you just go to those now, I'll say a little bit about what we're planning to do with this new site, stanislavskyheretoday.now.com. What we've done is we've appropriated the floor plan of the Moscow Art Theatre, and we've thought about how the individual areas of our website could speak to the geography of Muchat. So we have a lobby, we have a rehearsal space, a training space. And if Stefan takes us to the next slide, you'll see what we're intending to do. So in our library area, we've got new material, audiovisual material on our book publications as an international community, both historic and contemporary. In the rehearsal space, unsurprisingly, we've got video material on Stanislavski and rehearsal techniques and related practices right the way through the legacy. And you can see some fairly big hitters there in the collection of thumbnails on the bottom. And then in our stage space, we're looking at materials related to Stanislavski's directing and performance practices. Now, this doesn't come without significant preparation. We've been working on this for a number of months, and we have a planned release of these video materials entirely free for you to access, and which we hope, I think, properly represents the diversity and the extraordinary complexity of Stanislavski studies. In a way, I think what we're doing is feeding off the pandemic crisis that we're in and making the most of the digital space that we're able to properly resource the research field. And we can't wait to hear your feedback.
Thank you, Jonathan. I would like now to introduce and to start our webinar, today's session. So thank you for those introductions. Of course, it's a pleasure for me to be moderating this session, this seminar about Stanislavski and disability. As Paul said, this is the third of our new series of webinars brought to you by the Stanislavsky Research Centre which is co-hosted by the School of Performing Arts of the University of Malta, which I direct, and the School of Performance and Cultural Industries at the University of Leeds, which is led by Jonathan. I would say that these webinars reflect the broadest aim of the Research Centre, that is to diversify the Stanislavsky research, the field of Stanislavsky research, as well as explore not only, let's say, Stanislavsky per se, but also explore how Stanislavsky connects to our world today, how Stanislavsky is relevant to our world here, today, now. In fact, it is for this reason that our first webinar, for instance, was about teaching Stanislavsky online, something which I feel we are all experiencing at the moment. Then in November, we had the second webinar on Stanislavsky and race. And today we are going to be discussing Stanislavsky and disability, with perhaps, if I can put in a first provocation or like an umbrella question for today, which would be, how can we ensure, as performance-making practitioners using Stanislavsky's system, that our studios and rehearsal rooms become as diverse and as inclusive as possible. To discuss Stanislavsky and disability, we have an esteemed international panel who I will introduce briefly now. Anne Stocking, who is a member of the Actors Equity Association, Bella Merlin of the Department of Theatre, Film and Digital Production of the University of California, Riverside, Darren Oren of the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, Kate O'Reilly, who is an independent playwright and dramaturg, and Kaite Dacre of Rose Bruford College of Theatre and Performance in the UK. Before we start, just 1 minute on the format of the webinar, which will be as follows. So the speaker each have about 10 minutes, a maximum of 10 minutes, during which they will put in their intervention, their provocation. And after this set of presentations, we then can open for discussion and for questions. Please send your questions in the question and answer portal at the bottom of your screen. And feel free to do so at any point during the webinar. So you don't need to wait for the 5 presentations to be over to submit your questions. Please do so at any point in the evening. I think that's all from me. We can start our first speaker with Anne Stocking, who will be posing the question, would Stanislavsky have trained a person with a disability? Prejudice and ableism in modern actor training. Anne? You're muted.
There we go. Thank you, Stefan. Would you like to?
Yes. Second.
Starting with a clip.
Yes, just a second. Yeah. So I'm going to play this clip first.
Poor Meg. She got a worse deal than that no-armed baseball player Bucky LaGrange.
Ground ball to shortstop, the throw is to second, and again the ball sails past LaGrange into right field. The runners will score, and a cascade of boos rain down from the stands as clearly the fans' sympathy for this scrappy little no-arm man has run out. Now granted, the throw was a little wide, but you gotta believe that a two-arm player would have made the catch. In fact, a one-arm player would have at least had a shot at it, which calls to mind the question once again, why, with all the two-armed youngsters waiting in the minor leagues, does this team stick with an armless second baseman?
And he hasn't had a hit in ever.
In ever, Jerry. In ever.
Please.
So, Bucky LaGrange, clearly the fan sympathy for this scrappy little no-armed man has run out. Why, with all the two-armed youngsters waiting in the minor leagues, does this team stick with an armless second baseman? And he hasn't had a hit in ever, Jerry, in ever. So the only way I've gotten through the pandemic has been Family Guy and Turner Classic Movies. So I owe my debt of gratitude to Family Guy. And I'm clearly the intellectual that you really need for this discussion. When I found out I had to have 10 minutes. I thought, oh my God, how am I going to fill 10 minutes? And then of course, after you do the work, you realize, oh my God, I've got so much to say and I don't know how I'm going to fit it all in. So I'm going to talk fast. Because the subject is dense. It's a very dense topic. It's deep. And the Stanislavsky Center really needs to be commended for taking it on. And would you like to know how deep the dilemma can go? I'd like you to listen to some of the public comments in the video of the clip you just saw. You know how on YouTube they have comments by the public at the bottom? These are some of the comments. A man named Michael said, why didn't any of the other players go after the ball? Yeah, the no-armed player didn't even catch it, but it's up to the others to help out after the error. Well, that's pretty good. That's a good one, Michael. Grayson Gladney writes, when being woke goes too far that you can't even fire a no-armed baseball player out of fear of being fired for discrimination. Curtis Carmichael says, I love all the alliteration. Curtis Carmichael says, what did he do at tryouts to make the team? We will get back to that. And finally, Taco Conch, who is actually a beautiful young woman, if you look at her picture, apparently. She says the armless baseball player was probably drafted by a liberal lunatic. Thought he was just as capable as a two-armed counterpart, but was the victim of social constructs or some other nonsense. And to answer her, Marshall Leonard replies, what would be cool is if he had good enough health care to be able to afford prosthetics so he could hit 600 feet homers with bionic lifter arms. Now, poor Michael has fallen into the trap of trying to erase disability completely, but he's on the right track and I give him credit. So good for you, Marshall. So there you have it. That is the breadth of opinion on the training of no-armed baseball players and actors with disabilities. And you may think that Bucky LaGrange is an absurd example, but these are the attitudes that I still encounter when I out myself as an actor. I tell somebody I'm an actor. I get these looks. Many, many folks see Bucky when I walk into an audition room. I'll tell you really quickly, I'm 4'10", and my physicality is such that I will cause comment walking down the street. It's, you know, somebody trying to describe their disability, it's very difficult on a Zoom call, but it's more than a limp. And it's what historian Paul Longmore from San Francisco would say. He would say I'm all boogered up. So I'm all boogered up. But they see Bucky when I walk into an audition room before I've uttered a word. Even after they've glanced at my respectable resume, even after they've decided they want me for a role, the inevitable question is still asked. Are you going to be able to physically handle the role? No, what I want to say is, no, those 40 professional companies felt sorry for me and let me be their mascot for the show. And what I actually do is I try to smile sincerely and say, yes. Now, maybe what a director hears is, yes, I can handle it and I won't ask for any accommodations ever, and you will have no problems whatsoever because I know you're already under the gun with not enough money and not enough time, and I promise not to fuck up. I mean, that's what they want me to say, right? So being disabled, being an actor, never mind what I just said, how do you get the training you need from a culture that is still not absolutely sure that they want to see you at all? And I could tell you hair curling anecdotes and stories. I've got a lot of them, but we don't have time. I tell stories from 20 years ago, and I tell friends, and they always say the same thing, no. And I say, yes, it really happened. But I'm going to try and focus on the now and the future of training. And as a group of teachers, directors, actors, researchers, I'm really happy to be asked about training actors with disabilities. It's something I've thought about for many, many years. And to look at whether the Stanislavski system can be utilized to teach actors with disabilities. I don't have an absolute answer. My short answer is, I think so. I think it can. I've had to brush up on my Stanislavski. I realize now why you have a whole research center devoted to the topic, because the more I've delved back into it, it's very, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of discussion. There are many books. And I'm sure I don't have all of it at this very moment, but like I said, I brushed up on it. With an eye toward the particular question. The first and most obvious point is that his system was created in another time. You know, we like to think that we've evolved. I'm not quite sure we've evolved even that much, but certainly I don't think they were looking at questions in the 20s, 30s, teens about diversity and inclusion. And I also understand from a friend who trained in Russia that even today, being an actor and being disabled would not be accepted at all. If somebody knows different, you can certainly tell more about it as we open up the discussion. But according to my friend, this is just still not even a possibility. For many, many reasons, but a lot of it having to do with access, physical access to the buildings and attitudes. But in reading about Stanislavski's attitudes about his own methods of training, I believe he was a big believer in the individuality of the actor, and that he really valued the inner experience and possibility of creativity in the actor. He knew that his system could not benefit every actor in the same way, and that it would be according to their natural gifts.
2 minutes, Anne, please.
Oh, pardon? I have
2
2
minutes.
minutes? Oh,
yes.
my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Okay.
It's okay.
Well, I'm going to jump to what I think I'd like to ask from you as a group is that, you know, what it's going to take to change the situation is a decision. It takes a decision by the decision makers to change the situation. It's an awesome responsibility. I mean, choosing someone who may not work out, and you may get egg on your face, you know, because you've tried this thing that's never been tried before. And it can't be blamed on the way it was or is. I have to tell my story really quickly about auditioning for UCLA's MFA acting program. The chair was interested in me. There was a movement teacher that did not want to teach me. I didn't know why at the time, but they brought me back twice to face this movement guy. And he stood on his head and he says, "This is what we do in my class. Can you do that?" And by that point, I was so kind of fed up with having to come back, you know, drive from San Diego to Los Angeles 3 times to please this guy who I knew I'd never please, that I said, no, I can't do that. And that laissez-faire attitude that sometimes gets you the job is what I think got me into the program. But the decision maker was Mel Shapiro. He was a Tony Award, he is a Tony Award winning director with Joseph Papp. And he had to decide to do it. And he had to stand up to his colleague and say, you know, she's going to be in the class, and quit bitching about it and quit complaining and figure it out, you know. Now, he refused to teach me, absolutely refused. And I found out that he was able to do that in the United States because he was able to set the parameters of the class. And I had to make a decision, do I sue the university or do I finish? I was more than halfway through at the time, and I decided to keep going. I think if I had to do it over again, I might have sued, because I really believe that that is many times the only way things will change ever. But would you do that? Could you do that? Can you take a chance on somebody without the guarantee that things will go smoothly? Can you live with answering the tough questions together without defending yourself as a liberal, you know, that of course I don't discriminate, you know, and of course, because you may not know how to help or what to do. There may not be an answer. I may not know, the disabled person may not know the answer. And you have to figure it out together. And it's scary. I know that. It takes a leap into the unknown. No actor ever knows if they're going to pull off a role, ever, disabled or not. It's just that if a person's disabled, the disability makes it the easy target to say, oh, that's why it didn't work. But I have a feeling I'm done. And I there's a lot more to say, but I think that was enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for that very powerful statement. Thank you. Merlin now will be talking about throwing my money in the fire, addressing unconscious bias in psychophysical actor training.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Anne for beginning the whole event with such a forceful and powerful statement. In their online document, 10 Principles of Disability Justice, the Disability Justice-based performance project Sins Invalid lists their #1 principle as intersectionality, writing, ableism coupled with white supremacy, supported by capitalism, underscored by heteropatriarchy, has rendered the vast majority of the world invalid. This is a time of great reckoning in actor training as we deeply and sincerely tackle unconscious bias in all respects. With regard to race, as was mentioned earlier, there was the thought-provoking discussion in the last Stanislavsky Research Centre webinar. It's time not only to decolonize, but destabilize, disableize the actor training canon. And I'm very humbled to be sharing this stage with such eminent colleagues and dear friends in Anne and Kate in particular. My own great reckoning with regard to unconscious bias towards ableism happened a few months ago. In her article, Normalizing Non-Neutral Towards an Inclusive Acting Pedagogy, MA student Christy Honore at the University of Miami describes 2 of the key exercises that Tortsoff devises for his acting students in An Actor Prepares, the madman behind the door and the money burning exercise, as utilizing stereotypical depictions of disability as a means of provoking authentic performances. In the money burning exercise, as you may recall, a low type of moron, as the Hapgood translation puts it, watches his brother-in-law throw paper wrapping into the fire and then imitates him by throwing stacks of paper money into the fire. In anger, the brother-in-law throws him to the ground, which fatally wounds him. Christy Honore points out how offensive the given circumstances of these exercises are from a contemporary perspective. She then, in her article, alludes to my preface to Bloomsbury's edition of An Actor Prepares, in which I write, even those allusions that may now seem old-fashioned or specific to pre-revolutionary Russia can appeal to the lively imagination and make their point succinctly. The brooch hidden in the curtain, the madman behind the door, the money thrown into the fire by the simple brother. Each image is vivid and has its purpose in unlocking the actor's craft. Reading Christie's article, I was aghast. I never intended to imply that these vivid exercises were acceptable or old-fashioned in terms of contemporary treatment of neuro and physically diverse human beings. At the time of writing the preface in 2013, I was thinking more in terms of the class issues in Stanislavski, or maybe even Hollywood's love of characters such as Jack Torrance in The Shining or the narrator in Fight Club. I confess I hadn't even considered the gross insensitivity of these examples to those suffering genuine psychoses or disabilities. Even though Tortsov points out to Kostya that if his character had realized he had knocked his brother-in-law to the ground, you probably wouldn't be rooted to the spot, but would be rushing to help the dying man. In other words, Stanislavski's intention with the exercise is to veer his students away from melodrama towards faith and a sense of truth. But whatever his intention in the 1930s and whatever my intention in my 2013 preface, the collective impact had been to offend, and I'm mortified by that. Hence my reaching out to Stefan, Paul, and Jonathan to create this event. My active friend Bryce Michael Woods has a series of wonderful podcasts called For Your Discomfort, in which he invites white people to step into the room. While the conversations are uncomfortable, they're perhaps the most vital and dynamic ways to learn and shift the paradigm. And I know that if I don't participate in the complex conversations, I remain simple in my outlook, blinkered by my white privilege and constantly throwing my own money and everybody else's money into the fire. Of course, I could declare, well, we always used high-stakes circumstances in our drama training, be it being sent mad in an Arto class at Birmingham University or plunging into the lurid circumstances of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment at film school in Moscow. And maybe because I'd experienced all kinds of jibes at my own body at drama school and as a young actor, I'd become accustomed early in my career to people judging whether my body type was attractive enough, able enough to do the job required by the storytellers. But it's no longer acceptable to hide behind the shield of, well, this is how I was trained, so this is how I'll train others, or this is what the industry did to me. It's no longer appropriate, and it disrupts the possibility of a safe, brave space. In many respects, I'm learning constantly from my students. At both UC Davis, where I used to work, and at UC Riverside, where I now work, the students self-select their classes. So I don't necessarily know who's going to be in the class until I see them on the first day. If they've not requested in advance particular disability accommodations, I may not know of their circumstances until the very moment we first meet. Wheelchair-bound students with cerebral palsy, A-spectrum students, and students with various diagnosed and quite possibly undiagnosed mental health issues frequently choose acting classes as a space in which they feel they will be accepted and received with compassion. Therefore, it's my core value, my core imperative as an actor trainer to enhance a safe, brave space. So there are three little strategies I want to flag up here that I try to do to enable that to happen. First of all, I try to evolve and clarify a bedrock for Stanislavski-based training, which is essentially what I'm teaching. And that bedrock for me is playfulness, or what I might call imaginative relaxation. So the body doesn't necessarily have to be completely relaxed. I'm inviting an imaginative, playful relaxation. I'm also seeking to develop psychophysical coordination, that porous membrane between what we feel inside and how we express it to the world, and how we receive information from the world and how it alters how we're feeling inside. And I would suggest that that kind of dialogue between inner, outer, inner can apply to any of us, whatever shape or form our instrument takes. Though that even itself is a strategy that I'm constantly considering and evolving. My second strategy is to check my language. I try not to say, take a walk around the room, but rather take a voyage around the room or explore the room. I try not to say, come to a standing position, but rather feel the energy stream through the highest point of your body up to the skies and down into the ground through whatever contact you have with the floor. Maybe that's the legs or the wheels of a chair or your feet or your sitting bones in your seat. The neutral body or the balanced body still does have some role to play in my actor training, in that I'm seeking a place within each actor, in each student, of imaginative relaxation, as I mentioned. In other words, a balance between the sympathetic, anxious nervous system and the parasympathetic, calming nervous system. So I am seeking that kind of balance. So it's less about the balanced body in space and more about the balanced place in the body. The idea of a blank canvas to me is a place of playfulness, a place of unexpected discoveries, an easing into the present tense of whatever physical or psychological preoccupations may have been daunting or haunting us, either throughout our lives or immediately prior to a class, and letting all that information be present. And at the same time as being present, being allowed to ease or ebb away a little towards a sense of playfulness or willing vulnerability. My third strategy is to develop sensitivity to sense memory exercises. Some people have been losing their sense of taste and smell with COVID-19. Not everyone has sight or hearing. How might one of my students with cerebral palsy touch or handle an object? I'm trying not to take anything for granted. Though I've not yet had a student with aphantasia, which is the inability to visualize, which can apparently also affect other senses too. And research into aphantasia has been increasing over the last 5 years, and I will hope to learn more about that and therefore how I might help a student that has that particular experience. I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly getting it wrong, but I try to turn each moment of my pedagogical discomfort into a collective opportunity for learning and dialogue. And that is my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Bella, especially for sharing those strategies. I'm sure we'll come to those when we'll be having the discussion. And the third presenter is Darren Oren, who will be speaking about psychological, psychophysical, and physical, neurodivergent translations, and Stanislavski. Please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me along. My research and practice over the last 5 or 6 years has been looking at neurodiversity and psychophysical actor training. I've had a particular focus on dyslexia and dyspraxia, which are really seen as learning differences, but in terms of, certainly in the UK, in terms of funding for support for student actors, they're referred to as disabilities. So there's a crossover there and a question around how we define those. I've also worked with actors who are autistic and who are diagnosed with ADD and ADHD, but my research didn't look specifically at those. And in the last year, we graduated our first 2 actors who describe themselves as actors who are blind from our course. And that's been a great learning experience, and that might come up in some of the questions later on. I'm just going to focus in on 1 or 2 aspects of neurodiversity. And I guess the first thing I want to say, particularly after following Bella, is I don't consider myself to be a Stanislavski scholar. My engagement with Stanislavski is how I've met Stanislavski through my own training as an actor, through my own performance work. My own scholarly work has focused a little bit more on Chekhov's techniques and the connection of Chekhov's techniques with psychophysical voice training, in particular, the Kristen Linklater approach to voice training. The reason why the question of neurodiversity is so important within actor training is that on average, actor training courses will have double the average of neurodivergent students than other courses. And this is because the neurodivergent brain very often has creative advantages, ways of seeing the world, which are creative and help the student to get into acting courses and give them great benefits within the training. I had a conversation this morning. I had a girl phone me, a young girl phone me who's training at another school somewhere in the UK. And she was talking about how she's recently been diagnosed with dyslexia, dyspraxia and ADHD, and is getting no support at all. And it was a really heartbreaking kind of conversation I had with her. So it kind of just stimulated me today to talk through this with even more kind of conviction. When we look at dyspraxia, one of the key challenges for the dyspraxic actor is translating verbal instructions into physical experience. There's a sense of a disconnect there. And I give an example from my own training. So I was working with objectives, and I would go into a scene with the objective in my head. You know, maybe the objective is I want the other person to leave the stage. And I would be running through my head, I want them to leave the stage, I want them to leave the stage, all the way through the scene, trying to hold on to this objective in my head with nothing happening in my body, no change at all, because I hadn't yet understood the process of turning that objective into a physical experience, into an embodied experience. And this is something that dyspraxic actors particularly need to learn and need help with. And one of the problems with some of the approaches to Stanislavski training is where that training focuses predominantly on text analysis and table work. And actors are trained to write a whole series of psychological prompts into their text, units, objectives, obstacles, actions, lures, turning points, whatever you will. And these techniques are written down in the script, but there isn't an assistance in working out how to transform those words into a psychophysical or an emotional experience. I think that active analysis actually does begin to work in this way, because it sets aside that work and starts from the psychophysical experience. But one of the things for the dyslexic actor particularly is the need to focus on one thing at a time. And very often before a scene is run, there's a great big discussion about the scene, covering about 10 or 15 different points. And the actor, the dyslexic actor, is then left trying to hold all of those points in their head, and again becomes bound and stuck in their head because they're trying to remember everything that's been said. And a better strategy for those actors and for the dyspraxic actor is to identify one thing from the discussion. Let's note all the others, we can come back to them. What's one thing we can take into our exploration of the scene, the relationship, the given circumstances? Let's explore that one thing and then move on to something else after that, rather than trying to hold on to all of these things. And I very often say to my actors, if a director talks to you for 5 minutes about the scene, just choose one thing that they've said, do that one thing, the scene will change and the director will think they're brilliant. So it's just a tactic to give to the actors. I think that Michael Chekhov's techniques actually also offer a strategy for taking the psychological prompts of Stanislavski and translating those into physical experiences. Another thing with Michael Chekhov, again, is that the concepts can be quite abstract, and to the dyspraxic actor, that again needs translation. So something as seemingly simple to some people as molding the air with the hand will need a physical experience in order to understand that. So it might need the yielding resistance of a partner's hand to translate the feeling into the body before the imaginative act of molding invisible air with the hand and then bringing breath and language into that experience. An exercise that I've developed to work with young actors looking at objectives, a very simple exercise, which I kind of call the objective chair. So we start off with an actor in space and a chair across the room from them. And we just explore wanting to touch the chair. The actor stands and finds a desire within them. Where does that live? How does that feel? I want to touch the chair on the opposite side of the room. And from the side of the room, I will coach, I may say 5, and they can take 5 steps forward. What shifts in the body as you're closer to the chair? And then -7, what shifts as you're moving away from the chair? And we play this game until the sense of relationship, the physical relationship with the chair and the space is established. And then we can shift to getting the chair to represent the objective in the scene. So the chair might represent, I want this person to marry me. So we play the scene, my scene partner's playing with their objective and their chair, and my focus is on the chair. And if I feel I'm getting this person towards marrying me, I can move towards the chair. If I feel something's happening in the scene or I'm hearing something that takes me away from that, I can move away from the chair. And what that's doing is layering the psychological aspect of the scene onto an already experienced physical experience. So we start to bring it into the psychophysical relationship. And once that's layered in, we can then start to play in the imagined circumstances and the geography of the scene with that memory layered in. So for the dyspraxic actor, they're learning to translate the thoughts, the ideas, the objectives into a physical experience. And for the dyslexic actor, they're able to work with just one thing at a time. So they're just working with a single objective. We can shift that objective. We can throw an obstacle in. We can layer in the information over time rather than trying to achieve everything at once. One of the benefits of this, often I'll hear people say of our neurodivergent actors, well, we did it in rehearsal and then we came to it the following week and it had all gone. And that's because that work hasn't been anchored in the body. But if it's layered in this way, it gets anchored into the actor's experience and they're much more able to recall that work and come back to it. And whilst this work has come out of my experience of work with neurodivergent actors, it actually benefits all of the students I work with. It's not specialist work for neurodivergent students. It actually ends up being a good experience for all of the actors, for all of the students. So those are my thoughts at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren, for sharing that with us. Our fourth speaker is Kaite O'Reilly, who will be talking to us about conscious and unconscious bias and the atypical actor's body. Kaite?
Thank you. My title is /conscious bias and the atypical body. For as an activist and a theatre maker who identifies proudly as disabled, I believe the bias towards actors with atypical embodiment is conscious and ingrained, a form of systemic ableism. There is no un attached to this conscious bias. The brief was about how we can ensure our studios are as diverse and inclusive as possible. And so in the short time I have, I want to point not at Stanislavski, but our wider culture and some of the things I feel we need to challenge and change. Western culture values and applauds the art and craft of those who disappear into a role, invariably showering compliments, if not acting awards, on those who become the character. In Kate Kellaway's 2018 Observer article, she notes how, quote, Daniel Day-Lewis famously spent the entire shoot of Oscar-winning My Left Foot in a wheelchair to get into character as cerebral palsy sufferer Christy Brown, end of quote. This film was made in 1989, and yet almost 30 years later, it is still apparently relevant and to be admired. Consider this question. Why are non-disabled actors still playing the roles of disabled characters on stage and in films in the 21st century? This needs to change, along with what I see as the fetishization of impersonating the other. Certain kinds of actors' work results in exclusion and what I see as cripping up. As I put in my 2002 play, Feet Peeling, which satirizes our industry, cripping up is the 21st century's answer to blacking up. I work from the social model of disability, and I perceive disability as a social construct, revealing the fears and values of a particular society. It is physical and attitudinal barriers that disable, not the idiosyncrasies of the body. The hideous and highly problematic ways that contemporary actors have cripped up to play disabled characters like Shakespeare's Richard III reveals the normative perspective and fear of the other. The fact that professional actor training programs still often exclude those who happen to be disabled compounds the problem, apparently necessitating that non-disabled performers crip up to play the role. Much of my work is created in opposition to ableist notions long ingrained in Western culture and structures that exemplify what Tobin Cybers calls the ideology of ability, where, at its simplest, preference is always given to able-bodiedness, and where able-bodiedness constitutes the very baseline by which humanness is determined. End of quote. Within the Western theatrical tradition, disability has been configured and performed as a problem, where disability is a deficit, shaped by the medical model of disability, where characters with neurodiversity and/or atypical embodiment are defined according to diagnosis or condition, invariably requiring medicalization and normalization. Dramaturgically, disability has often been used as an inciting incident or point of crisis, what David Mitchell and Sharon Schneider describe as narrative prosthesis. Negative or stereotypical representations continue on stage and in media, largely because, as Victoria Ann Lewis believes, they fill a deep human need to define ourselves as normal against some standard of abnormality. So these are some of the ingrained attitudes we need to start challenging and changing, to interrogate approaches to character analysis, and perhaps also further widen the canon of texts so they include alternative perspectives, not just regarding disability, but age, cultural heritage, ethnicity, sexual preference, gender identification, and so on. Another question. Can a visibly disabled actor's body ever disappear into a role? Or is the disabled actor's body always on view? Carrie Sandal has written of how current actor training methods evolved to create standardized bodies appropriate to particular performance media, the so-called ballet bodies, character actor bodies, modern dance bodies, and so on. Many training techniques attempt to correct or cure individual idiosyncratic postures and habits, replacing them with the artistic form's prescribed ideal. Non-normative bodies are not welcome. I know many successful disabled and deaf actors who were refused auditions to drama or dance school. My long-term collaborator, Sarah Beer, who I know is joining us tonight, is one, told that with her physical difference, she would never get work, so she never even got an audition. And this is something Philip Zerilli and I explored when we co-wrote our meta-theatrical performance text, Richard III Redux, or Sarah Beer is is not Richard III. We wrote it for Sarah, wanting to revisit the work of the actor and process of building character, but from an alternative, radical disability perspective, while also recripping the crip and reclaiming the historical Richard III from the Tudor propaganda that Shakespeare wrought. Here is the central paradox. Actors with atypical embodiment are routinely excluded from drama schools despite their potential, as there is an assumption they cannot be other than what they are. And yet that veritable poster boy of embodied difference, Shakespeare's Richard III, is the non-disabled actor's Everest, the part which has been a vehicle for deforming and making Richard, and therefore disabled body, as monstrous as possible. In Richard III Redux, Philip, Sarah, and I relished irreverently deconstructing many of the recent deformations, from Ian McKellen's black-shirted fascist to Anthony Sher's double-crutched bottle spider, Benedict Cumberbatch's lifelike prosthetic to Lars Eidinger's cushion hump in Thomas Osteimer's post-dramatic production. These are all deeply problematic, fearful representations of a disabled body, and they are all acclaimed or award-winning. And at a central part of Richard III Redux, Sarah's actor character reflects, a body like mine can't play a body like mine. In the text, I took great pleasure in satirizing Anthony Sher's Year of the King, republished to great acclaim recently in an anniversary version called One of the Finest Books I've Ever Read on the Process of Acting, Time Out. This is a most wonderfully authentic account of the experience of creating a performance, the Sunday Times. One of the most ablest and problematic books I have ever encountered in my entire life. Kaite O'Reilly. It is still considered essential reading and is on many courses as a set text, and I hope its outdated opinions and troubling fascination towards disabled people as othered case studies do not pass unchallenged. I can but hope. Finally, wider diversity in actor and dance training institutes would reverse the previously held notions of what bodies are considered appropriate and inappropriate to certain performance media, forcing us to question and reconsider the body on stage. What is it to act like a man? To act like a woman? What is it to be human? And a few last thoughts. Question received ideas of difference. Don't assume one size fits all. If I could, I would make it a legal requirement that anybody who sits on audition panels, the decision makers as well as the teachers and the directors and so on, have disability awareness training and disability equality training. And finally, I would say we need to have more disabled and deaf cultural leaders, teachers, advisors, and consultants. Disabled and deaf people are the experts in inclusion. So use us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, for another powerful statement. Our final presenter tonight is Kaite Dacre, who will be speaking to us about Stanislavski and accessible performance. Kaite?
Thank you. Brilliant to be here and brilliant to hear such very powerful readings and statements before mine. I'm going to talk about Stanislavski, and the question I wanted to tackle today is not did Stanislavski encourage accessible practice, but do we as teachers of the performing arts encourage accessible practice in our teaching of Stanislavski? I'll start by quoting the UK Higher Education Quality Code on Inclusive Learning. A well-designed and inclusive learning environment anticipates multiple requirements of diverse types of learners and aims to eliminate any arbitrary and unnecessary barriers to learning. Providers, that's us, have a specific responsibility under the UK equality legislation to ensure that students with learning difficulties or disabilities are not placed at a disadvantage and receive accessible learning opportunities by means of inclusive design wherever possible and through reasonable individual adjustments at the point of need. The director, Stanislavski, of plays such as Lower Depths, Ghosts, The Wild Duck, Lonely Lives, certainly recognized the impact of physical, sensory, and neurodiverse differences on people's lives. He chose to describe his rehearsal room practice in the form of fictitious tales, often outdated and unnecessarily biased. But, you know, his practice developed and changed focus over his life. And I'm indebted to Sharon Moore-Kandaki for finding his quote and quoting it in 20th Century Actor. Human life, says Stanislavski, is so subtle, so complex, so multifaceted that it needs an incomparably large number of still undiscovered isms to express it fully. His first book, published in 1924, was encouraged just as part of a publicity campaign for a company tour of the US. Other books were written in the 30s, but they were to have an international impact on the training of actors. Declan Donovan, one of our acclaimed directors, says, "It's not just because Stanislavski founded the Moscow Art Theatre and commissioned a short story writer called Anton Chekhov to write the greatest plays since Shakespeare. He matters because he saw something living at the heart of acting. He saw there was a difference between acting and pretending." That links very much to our last speaker. He saw that although this difference might be hard to express in words, it is nonetheless crucial to explore. His pedagogic style, we use, involves in-depth reflection on the work, stages of physicalization, moving the text from page to stage. I led a research project 10 years ago on teaching Stanislavski. And we found that many of Stanislavski's ideas on rehearsal room practice had become rules in so many conservatoires. The steps to complete and rules to follow were sort of encouraged by publications by Stella Adler and Jutta Hagen in the USA. And they led to a really rigid adherence, certainly in the UK, on approaches to Stanislavski's work. Work in the UK was heavily influenced, not by European, but by US practitioners. And the impact even of Sanford Meisner and Mikhail Chekhov also led to a rigid adherence to exercises, etudes, stages of work inspired by Stanislavski. This rigidity does not lead to a celebration of difference. Julian Jones, one of my colleagues in the research project, says, "The danger has always been that the ideas of Stanislavski and those that followed in his wake have been hardened into laws or rules, and their appropriation by various factions as a means of legitimization has been decidedly counterproductive." This, of course, was a consequence of a historic moment in which he wrote, where the development of laws of acting did not seem out of place, and in Russia, the growing demands of socialist realism colluded in the formation of such laws. Art could not be dangerous at that point. Laws and processes had to be followed. And so Julian linked the idea of the time that Stanislavski was writing with an adherence to knowing what was going on. Let's have a think at this moment on the idea that great art and creativity happen when laws are broken, differences acknowledged and explored. And that's what we're about as teachers. Sadly, in UK higher education, curricula has been strongly influenced over the past decade by the notion of constructive alignment, a term coined by John Biggs in 1999. This is now the underpinning concept behind the current requirements for programme specifications in conservatoire and university teaching. One has to align intended learning outcomes and assessment criteria. Assessment is based on student competence in completing intended learning outcomes. This alignment may have brought a clarity of content and purpose to curriculum designs and recording of those by the higher education people. But intended learning outcomes does not fit with the teaching of Stanislavski. And intended learning outcomes has certainly not helped to the journey to accessible practice. The former use of aims, objectives, or simply a description of content for a university or conservatoire degree led to a far more flexible interpretation of what was assessed in student performance practice. But this focus on learning outcomes has simply, with the rules that we have developed, has led to a more prescriptive assessment regime. It's become a constrictive alignment rather than constructive. And in order to be accessible for students, needs to be very carefully matched with alternative outcomes and reasonable adjustments. For the past 15 years, I have been researching and working on developing accessible curricula as a former director of learning and teaching development at Rose Bruford College, and with my work with the Grey Eye Theatre Company. My colleague Ros Platten, our specialist research support and equality officer, and the teaching team for the BA Acting started to work some time ago with the Grey Eye Theatre Company, which is a leading professional theatre company of practitioners with physical or sensory impairments. We worked closely together to create, we worked closely together on the Arts Council England project, Into the Scene, and created with, Grey Eye created with our assistants, a guide to inclusive teaching practice in theatre. The DVD, Into the Scene, I co-directed, and our staff took part in that with a whole range of our students with disabilities, actors with disabilities, and teachers from Grey Eye. So there, within that guide to inclusive teaching, we learned about advice on teaching students who are deaf, blind, visually impaired, and wheelchair users. We have had at Rose Bruford blind students, wheelchair users, and profoundly deaf students. And the curriculum has been flexibly altered with reasonable adjustments so those students could achieve everything they were wonderfully capable of. More recent research has been focused on students who are neurodiverse. And as Daron has said, neurodiversity does make huge demands when one is following a Stanislavski style of teaching and Stanislavski way of researching. Judy Singer, in her work on neurodiversity, talks of the rise of neurodiversity takes postmodern fragmentation one step further. Just as with the postmodern era, we saw everything in too solid belief melt into air, even our most taken for granted assumptions. And one assumption that we all more or less see, feel, touch, hear, smell, and sort out information in more or less the same way was being dissolved. So when performing arts-based programs start to consider, particularly in the work of Stanislavski, how they make this work accessible to students with neurodiversity, we come into some different ways of approaching Stanislavski, but we also come into exciting ways of discovering creativity. Performing arts programs, as Darren has said, have worked very hard to include students with dyslexia and dyspraxia, but we still need to understand the needs of students on the autistic spectrum as it impacts on Stanislavski practice. These students might have difficulties interpreting verbal and non-verbal language, so important in Stanislavski. They might have difficulty reading what other people are saying with their body language, or expressing their own emotions. They might seem insensitive. They might prefer to have routines rather than etude or progressive ways of approaching a Stanislavski character. They might be oversensitive to sound, noise, smells, colors, temperatures. They might be anxious, and anxiety, we have found, is the most overriding factor in the rehearsal room when we have students who might be on the autistic spectrum. So stopping anxiety and thinking about all the needs of students is important. It's possible. And when it becomes, when the work of Stanislavski becomes accessible to students who are on the autistic spectrum, from experience we have found we get highly creative, hugely innovative, and new visions of what characters, relationships, and being on stage can be. So what I would like to end with are two things, really. One, I think a teaching curriculum based on rules and outcomes does not sit well with difference. And what we might use is Stanislavski coming to our aid. As teachers, we have to use the magic if. Would I be able to do this if? Would I be able to do that if? And if we put ourselves in the place and think ahead with our curriculum, whatever we decide to do in class, whatever we decide to write as part of our drama practice, would I be able to do this if? If we can work towards new creativity and insight and performance and staging of performance by the inclusion of actors, student actors, and then great actors who have physical, sensory, or neurodiverse, I won't say disabilities. They're not a disability when you can bring them into performance. They are a diffability. And if we can bring students with disabilities on, we can celebrate new creativity in the work of Stanislavski. And we might even be able, through inclusion and through accessibility, bring Stanislavsky's work to something, as he would say, simpler, lighter, higher, and more joyful. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kaite, and of course, thank you to all 5 presenters today. I think I would like to thank you for sharing not only your work, but also your personal experience. I think it gave a very particular momentum to the session tonight. We received a lot of questions. Okay, we received a number of questions in the chat and in the Q&A. We'll try to go through as many questions as possible. There are some questions which are technical in nature, but other questions which are much broader that go, I feel, to the very root of our work. So, and again, there were some questions which were to the whole panel and other questions which were to specific individuals. One theme which sort of recurred in the questions was the theme of space. The idea of space, and with space, of course, we're not only referring to the actual room, we're referring to the space of teaching, the programs of teaching. For instance, one particular person mentioned, just a second, that there are teachers who, of course, are still claiming ownership of their programs. This is my program, this is my space. We set the parameters of expectations and behavior, and those outside that circle beware. And of course, the panelists have all critiqued this and have spoken about a completely different space. A space, I loved this personally, a space which is both safe and brave. I like the use of those 2 words, which we might think of them as being paradoxically put together, but I love the way that they have been placed together. A space which is both safe and a space which is brave. A space which helps us to rethink our terms, our terminology, a space that helps us to rethink the rules and outcomes, to question those, and to transform the learning experience into a continuous learning experience. In fact, Anne started by saying, can Stanislavski be applied to training the disabled actor? And she just posed that as a question rather than giving an answer. So my first question would be, if the panelists, it's a question to all panelists, if they would like to speak a little bit more about this idea of creating a space, and a space which is both safe and brave, a learning space, a continuously learning space. So if you, yeah, Bella?
So one of the silver linings actually of this Zoom environment has curiously been the chat. And one of the ways in which in the learning environments that I've experienced over the last 6 months, we've encouraged that sense of safety and bravery is for students to feel and that they can talk to me directly offline, if you like, through the chat. And it happened in this very presentation. And I do actually want to thank Daron for this. I screwed up in this presentation. So I said wheelchair bound, and the bizarre thing was that wasn't even in my notes. My eye auto-corrected my notes. That shows how unconscious my bias is, that even in the moment of speaking, I changed, made uncorrect rather. So I first of all want to apologize and say wheelchair users. So the very fact that we come into the space being willingly vulnerable. If we're asking of our students to be willingly vulnerable, and we ourselves are going to be willingly vulnerable, so that there is a genuine learning dialogue going on all the time. So that a little bit is that's how I've experienced the safe, brave space, is by actually using the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Bella. Darren, please.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on what Bella was saying there. The willingness as a teacher or actor trainer to make mistakes. If we are going to change our practice, then we have to be afforded the ability to make mistakes. One of the students that I mentioned, one of our students who recently graduated, who was blind, we made a film together about their experiences, and he talked about a moment in teaching when I said, so if you can't see me where you are in the room, move forwards, and he just walked straight across the room and right into me. Just in that moment of the use of language and kind of he was playfully challenging my use of language in that moment. It's the ability to make mistakes. I think one of the greatest benefits that came out of my neurodiversity research was going into the room not knowing how to train my students. And that shifted my relationship with students in a way that I've tried to hold on to, continuing on even after having done the research. I still try to go into the training and really across all of my research, across race and class within speech and voice work as well, it's a shift towards a more critical pedagogy, shifting the power dynamics in the room. And as Kathy said, there are so many rules that we have created that we think are unbreakable in theatre training. You know, the idea that we don't demonstrate certain physical exercises, that students have to discover them for themselves because they will mimic or end game those exercises. That's a myth. If you take that away, you can demonstrate. The world doesn't fall apart, but we've created myths and they've been handed down through our training that they feel like rules that we can't break. And that's kind of been a big change in that as well.
Thank you. Anybody else from the panel would like to continue this discussion? Kaite, please.
Thank you so much.
Sorry.
I'll let you go first.
Okay, I was just going to say, sorry, is that okay? It's me. I was just going to say, following Darren's point, Stanislavski moved towards exploring and bringing real characters on stage, and he moved against a training regime. I think it was across Europe, but it was certainly prevalent in the UK, where you had master actors who told the next generation of actors how to act these certain characters. They played stereotype. It was learning how to be a stereotype. And Stanislavski's methodology, pedagogy, moved against that. But what we seem to have done with Stanislavski's pedagogy is moved into, again, a master teacher or a craftsperson, telling the next generation of actors what to do. And as Darren said, you know, having to run the program as you were taught the program 20 years ago, and having to do as I do. And I think the main change we can really bring in making ourselves very accessible is to actually bring huge humility. I mean, again, it's the Stanislavski. What if how I teach is really rubbish? And you as students are actually going to tell me perhaps how you can bring creativity and exploration and a better style of pedagogy to our classroom and to our rehearsal space. But it's again, knowing that you can be getting it wrong. What if I couldn't understand what I was saying? What if I was you and couldn't understand what you were trying to encourage me to do? I think humility in teaching is huge, and getting away from this guru style master teacher or mistress teacher or whatever is the way forward with any actor training.
Thank you, Kaite. Just to introduce a little bit of sequencing to the answers. So now, Kaite, feel free to answer this particular question. And then, Anne, there's a question which is directed to you. I will come to it in a minute. Kaite, please.
Thank you. I think I do a lot of training around inclusivity and how do we create an inclusive space. And it's some of the notes that I said right at the end of my presentation, when I'm saying we shouldn't assume that one size fits all. And what I always do, and what I think is wonderful to try and think about, is every time we go into that space, and we want that space that is safe and full of possibility, but actually we are all responsible for trying to create an environment where everybody is encouraged or have the conditions where they can make the best work that they can. And I've very, I'm tired of being in situations where I'm expected to adjust, or, I work a lot within, in work that is integrated rather than inclusive, whereas I can participate as long as I fit into the environment. I think it's a massive thing if we just start saying, before we even begin the work, what do we need? And to also encourage that openness and honesty and communication and engagement, even if we're running into walls and we're finding it difficult to actually articulate what we need. It's a really good practice where everyone is equally responsible for themselves, but also to try and enable that environment where everyone feels supported and able to do the very best that they can. And I think we forget this it's too often, and I worked within disability arts and culture for over 30 years. And what I find consistently with these kind of remarkable actors and practitioners that I work with, they will often have great problems working in other contexts because this simple thing isn't brought in. And so they do a bad rehearsal, they do a bad audition, they have a bad class because they said, oh, well, it was awful because I went in and the light was in this way, I couldn't see what I was doing, or there was a sound, or there was, whatever these conditions are. And if we can try and ensure at the start of every practice that as much as possible, we've got that even playing field, it also, I think, creates a wonderful dynamic amongst the company and starts working towards ensemble as well, and truthfulness and honesty and vulnerability, and the fact that we go, I made a mistake, and learning together how we can make that better. Thank you for letting me throw that in.
Thank you, Kate. And feel free to continue this line of discussion if you want, but a question that was directed to you is the following. What role did the fact that you were the only disabled student in your MFA program and in the many professional productions that you have played in, what role did this play?
Wow, yeah. Often I know that I'm the only disabled person that they've ever encountered, ever met, and they're nervous. I'm talking about, the cast. They're afraid to say the wrong thing. They're afraid I'm very sensitive. And they also don't know if I can do it, and also there's sometimes a resentment, unconscious, subconscious, about the, the other that you sometimes have to deal with. And it's, it's one of those things I talked about that you just have to be brave about and work through together, to have these misunderstandings and to be able to talk about them or ignore them and get on with it, because a lot of times there isn't enough time or money or, but I did want to go back. I did want to go back to the earlier question about the brave and safe space. When I think all students, when my class got together in the room, if there's honesty, it's made a brave space by the trusted teacher. We know we're on the precipice of changing our very selves in a way. We're changing our thinking, we're changing our bodies, the way we're responding. That was another thing I wanted to say earlier about actors with disabilities. They do often have a disconnect between a mind and body. I was told right off the bat that I was a talking head, but I wasn't the only one. And it wasn't just because of my disability. A lot of people, disabled or not, are disconnected from their body. So it's not an exclusive thing to disability. And Alexander technique, which I studied for all the years I was in school, really changed my relationship with my body. So with my disability, I thought I was helping myself by having tension, you know, and that it was stopping me from falling and hurting myself, but really it was causing problems. And then when I was able to connect the two, I was much more supple, had a greater ability to walk, you know. So really actor training changed my life in a really great way as far as disability. Because we're often told with disability, you know, if I said it when I was younger that I was in pain, you know, the first thing my family said was, oh, no, you're not. Come on, we're going. Go out and play. No, you're fine. You're fine. You know, so that I think a lot of disabled people get that. And I think it does your head in for a while. And then the last thing, you know, my coach is, for a long time, has been Salome Jens. She's a method actress, teacher, studied under Strasberg. And I asked her once, you know, why have we never talked about my disability, or why has it not been a thing for you? Because it never has been a thing for her. I mean, I don't think we've ever really talked about it at all. Other than in my personal life, you know, talking about things that happened, but as far as the work, it's never come up. And she told me that because she saw what I wanted, she saw what I was after, and that I was after the work. So that's why it never came up. You know, I was after, you know, trying to find what Strasberg, what Stanislavski, what all the great acting teachers were trying to get actors to be. Not saying I ever accomplished it. Maybe got close, maybe getting closer. I don't know, but so I'm just saying, I don't need it to be safe. I don't need it. Please don't make it a safe space. It's not safe for anybody. It's not safe for any of the 12 people that were in my class. And it would be dangerous. Ironically, if it were safe, you know. And plus, that movement teacher that didn't want to teach me, that was his excuse for not teaching me, was that he didn't want, you know, I'd feel terrible if you got hurt. I can't have you here because I'd be afraid you got hurt. And I told him, I'm not going to do anything that's going to hurt me in your class. If I can't do it, I'll tell you. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. We had questions and answers and discussion about physical disabilities, but there is also a question about mental health, which I would like to pose. It's also a technical question related to concrete exercises. And it's a question to the whole panel. So how would the panel suggest working with emotion memory for performance students who have mental health conditions, particularly PTSD? Even happy memories can cause triggers. So the person here wondered how the panel suggests working teaching this. Any answers to this question? Bella?
I can offer a quick one, and I hope in its quickness it isn't too glib. I don't do an awful lot of emotion memory work. I focus predominantly on this present tense tangibles, what's around me, and also imagination. So I talk about the fact present tense is what's here and now. Yes. Inevitably, imagination is the future and memory is the past, and all those three, they don't actually work in a linear way. They work in a spiral way. But I don't really do any conscious emotion memory exercises.
Darren, please.
Just to kind of concur with Bella there, but to also say that There are so many things in the acting studio that can trigger people: texts, poems, music, and so we just have to be mindful of those moments. Where we have particular texts we're bringing in, we need to flag those up in advance. We need to give students an opportunity to know what's coming up for them. And we also have to really understand that there is a crisis of mental health in higher education at the moment. And at any one time, a good third of your students might be seeking support for mental health conditions. And you know, I would suggest there's another panel's worth of conversation around this. But I remember when I was training as a voice teacher, a teacher said to me, well, people have to be psychologically robust to train as an actor. And that is a really problematic position to take. And if that position is still out in the world, that's something we need to consider. And we really need to be looking at mental health practices that are supporting mental health throughout the training. And again, it's a huge area for more research, more work on.
I have a question which I think Kaite would be offering us some invaluable insight here. It's directed to you, in fact, and it is about that moment, which I feel is a very rich moment. The first moment of a newly formed group, the first moment when a group is coming together to work together, to create a piece, or to start training together. So the question is, how do you suggest asking a newly formed group of actors in a training program or in a performance what access needs they have, recognizing that asking people to announce them in a large group of people may be putting pressure to speak out when they may not be comfortable doing so in front of others, and also wanting the room to be accepting and respectful of the whole of people's identities. So Kaite, but really and truly anybody can pitch in for this question.
Yes, Kaite, I'm not sure which of us you mean.
Oh, yes,
Dacre.
Right. What we do at Rose Bruford is students are encouraged to declare their personal needs in class, and that includes, you know, all sorts of possibilities, from mental health issues to physical impairment. So and that happens before classes begin. And the next stage on that is to ask students whether they, on an individual basis, to have they, once you meet them as a tutor, do you have any special needs? Do you want this class to be different in some way? And sometimes it's a good idea to share physically. You know, they might draw on a map the learning journey with a red crayon. They might put post-it notes up. It doesn't have to be an individual declaration, because anxiety is you know, hugely dreadful if you have to go into a rehearsal room and say who you are and introduce yourself. But gradual steps towards that, and some anonymity perhaps in that to begin with. But the important thing is the personal contact and the knowing what needs a student has. We have learning agreements where students will say, I need this help, and that'll be put in writing or in discussion before. So knowing in advance, because actually going into a room is incredibly frightening if you haven't been into that room before. So allowing students who, allowing all students to explore spaces, explore where they're going to work, feel the space, and know the space before they start to work in it. That's really important. And as acting is all about, well, telling stories, one of the things that I always do in an introduction to acting is get students to tell in small groups stories, but they tell a story that's real, about themselves. They tell a story that's not real about themselves, and they don't tell each other which is the reality and which is the non-reality. And that sometimes shares, they do at the end of the semester, but sharing stories, and then each group will bring the needs, the stories of people in their group, which might be real, might be not, but it's a sort of anonymity of declaring personal worries, concerns that is important in the first stages of getting a group together. And the other thing we do is have a sort of group, group suggestions of how the group might behave towards each other, group concerns about each other, and noting those concerns, you know, simply like always talk facing the person, or always talk loudly, not too loudly, or always consider we need time sometimes that is quiet within a rehearsal room. We need gaps between exercises, those sort of things that students are often much, much brighter than we are. So, you know, gives them the authority to design their learning space.
Thank you, Katie. Kate, you wanted to continue this discussion?
Yes, I suppose partly building onto the end of those, you know, great suggestions that we heard just then. I just wanted to say, from a disability perspective, and, you know, and I will be talking from a radical disability perspective, disabled community in the UK decided to reject the term special needs, because we're all special and we all have needs. And by that term special needs, we're immediately being singled out, rather than just, you know, an equal person in the group whose requirements perhaps to access the class or whatever else it might be should be a right, rather than something that is special, that is kind of given to us by those that don't have necessarily those kind of needs. So just sort of from that perspective, I think I'm talking more now, I suppose, as a company, rather than, I think it's a different dynamic when you're a company coming together, rather than perhaps, you know, strangers coming together as students, has a very different dynamic. But I think as a company, I mean, the biggest thing that we need to change, and I really believe this, we have got to destigmatize disability. It is nothing to be ashamed about. There should be no shame attached to it whatsoever. And we have to, this is why I really think we have to reject the medical model of disability that identifies people through condition or diagnosis, and also just actually see from social model point of view, where it is a construct. And it is not the individual's fault or deficit. It is our structures in our society. It's a societal construct. And if we accept that right from the beginning in our companies and in our institutions and in our drama schools, where we're going, it's our responsibility to actually try and create, to get rid of the barriers, both attitudinally and physically, which is actually what that's what disables, not the body itself. And I think if we can just, you know, it's an incredible, I've had this personal revolution where I suddenly embraced the social model and realized it wasn't my fault. It was my right to have equal access to education, to work, to job opportunities and so on. And I really regret in the UK, we're going backwards. And I was part of the disabled people's political movement. And, you know, we are, and within my community in the UK and internationally, we're talking about how our rights are being eroded and how this notion of shame is coming back in, that disability is something other or lesser or to be ashamed of. So if we can destigmatize, we can also then, you know, create, I think, much healthier and stronger and inclusive situations, which in lots of ways, this was the question that I certainly came to this sharing with. So again, thank you so much for giving me the time to speak.
So I'm going to ask Darren to speak next, and then Anne, and I think we can bring the webinar to a conclusion. There's a very rich chat going on, okay? There are some other questions which I don't think we'll have time to answer, but please, Darren, and then Anne, and we'll conclude the webinar, please.
Just picking up on what Kate was saying there around the social model of disability, in terms of neurodiversity, the support that's available for neurodiverse students can actually be part of the problem, in that students are diagnosed as neurodiverse, they receive one-to-one support outside of the classroom, and the tutors then believe that that is being dealt with and they do not have to engage with it. And actually the main problem is with the teaching, and not the problem is not with the students, the problem is with the teaching, and the teaching needs to adapt so that everybody in the room has an equal ability to access that teaching. There are great things that dyslexia support tutors can do, and they're hugely valuable, but if we see that medical model of diagnosis and support as being external to the training, then that creates actually part of the problem, and we have to break down the wall between that external support that happens and what's happening in the classroom, and build a dialogue between the various areas of the school that offer support, and not keep those as separate entities.
Thank you, Darren. Anne?
Yeah, I just wanted to hail what Katie said. You know, the thing that still gets me, and the only reason I've been able to have a career is because it blows my mind that anybody thinks that me being on stage is a problem. Like, and I don't know where that came from. I don't know why, you know, my parents did raise me to be very independent. I don't know if it's just part of my personality, but it drives me nuts. I don't know what the problem is. I don't know why we are still talking about this. What is the problem? You know, I'm a human being. Plays and they're about human beings. We want to see human beings on the stage. I mean, I just, you know, and I graduated in 2001. Now this goes to Katie talking about things going backwards. I graduated the same year with another actress. We're friends. She graduated from Cal State Long Beach, and I graduated from UCLA, MFAs. The next person that I was aware of was 2010. 10 years later, one more person that I knew that had been professionally trained. It's not going to work, guys, you know? And then if it's one person every 10 years, yes, we have a Tony Award winner now that was in a wheelchair. She's wonderful. It's great. But that, you know, that's still one, one more of the handful of people that I know that have careers. So I'm glad we're talking about it, but it's disappointing to still be talking about it. And it blows my mind. Thank you.
I understand the way you put it. Of course, that, you know, it's disappointing that we are talking about it. These are issues that, you know, we are raising here, we are sharing, and hopefully we are making them, I would say, we're being more exposed to the questions than the points that you have raised, and we are more aware. That's the question that that's the word that I was looking for, and we are more aware of the presentations and the points that you raised in your various inputs. I don't know if there are any other points that the other panelists would like to raise as a concluding point. Bella or Katie? Kate?
I just want to say that this is how change happens.
Exactly.
And I'm really grateful to be given this platform to share and to speak. And I'm really excited that we are addressing challenging, problematic issues. And I just think that this is how change happens. And so we can transform actor training. We can transform theatre. We can actually change the bodies that are on stage and the theatre languages at play. We can really revolutionize and radicalize and move along our training, but also the form. And I just feel very privileged. Thank you so much for letting me be here amongst you. But I would really encourage everybody to keep being vulnerable and making mistakes and having these tricky conversations. And again, I thank you for giving me the platform.
Thank you. And in fact, I would like to conclude on that point. Sorry, Paul, yes?
Can I say something really quick though? Yes, but I can't tell you how many panels I've been on. We have people, somebody has to make a decision, has to make a commitment to recruit somebody. Who have you recruited to be in your class? Who have you gone out and searched for? Who maybe hasn't had the guts, to say they want to be an actor because it's so, it's still so unacceptable. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying, how many panels can we have before we actually do something concrete to pull that student in and get them trained and get them out there? Thank you.
Kaite and then Paul. Kaite Dacre and then Paul. Okay.
One step forward, and there's lots more steps to go, but last year, my college, Rose Bruford, accredited at first year degree level an ensemble program that is specifically for students with what we call disabilities, but disabilities, sensory, physical, autistic spectrum. It's run and taught by practitioners from the Grey Eye Theatre Company. And if students complete this program, it's open to 12 students a year. They can then go on to drama training, but they have 60 credits. So they can make choices. They can say, I'm not going to do that module on your drama training program. I've already got 60 credits. I'll put my 60 in for that 30 credit module. It's a way of giving students who want to be actors and who will go on to make a great difference in our performing, in our production and performance in the UK. It's a way of giving them a tool to say, I've trained in this way, I don't need to do that part of your training. So, we're trying to make a difference in drama training, and I know Darren is trying to make a difference in training at Central. So the conservatoires in the UK are on the march, but it's probably the wrong term to use, but they're on the journey that will make a difference eventually. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. I just wanted to take the opportunity of thanking the panel for the amazing contribution this evening, but also to thank the attendees. I've been monitoring the chat during this evening. There have been some very, very pertinent and important points raised. I want to say to all of you, remind all of you, the S Word is a completely collaborative project. What we do depends on you. So our webinars are starting points. They are not finishing points. They're intended to start the debate and to begin to move a debate forward. Now, I know we're coming into this debate quite a long way through its history, and I understand exactly the frustration that Anne has expressed and sympathize hugely with it. I do think that events like this make major contributions, but how we go forward from this depends on what you want to do. So will you please take the opportunity of contacting us, having a dialogue with us and telling us what you would like us to look at, what you would like us to explore, and what you think we might be able to do next. But thank you all very much.
On behalf of my colleagues, Paul Fryer and Jonathan Pitches, again, I would like to thank you for participating in this panel, both as panelists and of course as attendees. We have a whole series of events planned for the Stanislavsky Research Centre, so do please remain in touch. Some of you have asked, can we write, can we email? Of course, please write, please email, let's network, let's remain in touch. So I would like to thank everybody again for participating. Thank you and stay well.